Good evening. Welcome to the July 17th, 2025 edition of Week to Week, the political roundtable from Commonwealth Club, World Affairs of California. I'm John Zipperer, the host for the program and the Vice President of Media and Editorial here at the club. And I also give this reminder, which is, if you got a cell phone that makes noise, please make it not make noise. You can turn it off, you can just silence it, you can put it in a bucket of water or something, I don't care. Just no noise during the program. Okay, and did you all see the news? Yeah, well, actually, you might remember this when Mr. Rogers testified before Congress many years ago in defense of public broadcasting. Yeah. Okay, so this is kind of like a classic that was then, this is now moment, because of course now Congress is getting rid of all funding for NPR and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This comes on the heels of Elmo's Twitter account being hacked and inappropriate stuff being posted. It's really been an annus horribilis for public broadcasting. And considering that the old Shields and Brooks on PBS NewsHour was one of the inspirations for Week to Week, we feel for you. We feel for you. Definitely. So we'll try to lift up public broadcasting spirits. Tonight, we're going to discuss some important issues, and we've got an important panel who's going to do it all. So let's meet them. On the far end of the stage is Tim Anaya. He's the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Pacific Research Institute and the author of the California Left Coast Survivor's Guide. Tim.
Thank you, guys.
Bravo.
Next to him is Josh Kane, the Senior Political Reporter for the San Francisco Standard.
Bravo.
And next to me is a political legend. She's the political journalist, former writer for the Political California Playbook, former senior political writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, Carla Marinucci. You know how we do it here. We've got question cards and beach balls spread around throughout the room. If you have a question, write it down, especially earlier in the hour, just because later we might not be able to get to it. So let's get started, and let's get started with, let's see, it's called BBB. I have beach ball in my head, but that's not what it's for. Big, beautiful bill.
No.
You love it. Lots of fans of it. Good. The Republicans passed it in the House, and then they passed it in the Senate, then they passed it in the House again, and reconciliation, blah, blah, blah. The president signed it. It is now law. Let's kind of start with the big winners and losers, if you will, politically speaking. Start with you, Tim.
Well, first I wanted to apologize for us being out a little late tonight. Josh and I had to bus Carla out of Alcatraz on the way over here tonight, so it took a little doing to get out here on time. But my decoy was pretty good to sneak Carla past the guards. But, I think if you look at it, there's kind of the policy winners and losers, and there's the political winners and losers. I would say on the political winners and losers, I mean, Speaker Johnson, who I think is continually underestimated, and obviously being a Kevin McCarthy guy, I was not the biggest fan of Speaker Johnson when he came in, but you got to hand it to the guy, big vote after big vote, he manages to get it through. Now, whether it's his own doing or not, I think of the whole thing, he's probably the biggest winner. Now, that could turn into the biggest loser if Democrats use a lot of the provisions of the bill to defeat his majority in the next election. And I thank the president. This is his, if you look at it in terms of, the strategy behind the big, beautiful bill, whether they're good policies or not, it's a lot of the things that he said he wanted to do, and he was able to tick off a lot of boxes, on his to-do list in this bill. On the policy side, it's, I think the Wall Street Journal said it best. They call it a meh bill, and there's certainly, on tax policy, there's some good things and bad things. We actually write a lot at PRI about the state and local tax deduction issue. We would argue, so state and local tax deduction is you can deduct the value of your state income taxes and your property taxes that you pay, and it's been limited since 2017. And it actually was very politically fraught when that came through. And many Republican members, Amy Walters, for example, from Orange County, lost their seats largely because of this issue, because in high tax, high spending states, those members lost out. That was a real tax increase for people. We would argue at PRI in our research, the reason for that is because states like California, we're spending too much in the state budget, and as a result, your taxes are too high to fund that level of spending. So really, you should be mad at your state legislature and your governor, not your congressman. And so that issue of, well, we're going to quadruple it, I believe what they did, it kind of prolongs a bad policy, and it kind of encourages kind of bigger government and higher taxes and spending in the states.
But having said that, does this passage of this change protect certain Republicans maybe in purple states?
I think that's the only reason they did it. Whether that's an effective talking point is another matter. But I think that's now what it comes down to. A lot of the provisions of this bill, right, they're not going to take effect for a while. Mm-hmm. So there's, depending on what you think, if you're a Democrat running in these seats, you got a lot of fodder that you can hit your Republican opponent on. If you're a Republican running in these seats, you got a lot of fodder that you can hit back on. Mm-hmm. So really, it's going to be up to the voters to decide in the next election whether this was a beautiful bill or an ugly bill. But yeah, so we'll see. I think Congresswoman Young Kim in Orange County is hoping that that was enough to avoid the fate that Mimi Walters suffered through, and some other members in New York.
Okay.
But I think
Carla, then Josh.
I think David Valadeo's got to sweat this one out. 2/3 of the people in his district rely on Medi-Cal, which is the California version of Medicare. And let me just say,
Medicaid or Medicaid?
Medicaid, I'm sorry, yeah. And let me just say, this is where I think the Republicans were very smart and sneaky in many ways, because remember in 2016, after Trump was elected, we're going to kill Obamacare.
Right.
And it was John McCain with that one thumb down. And it created a lot of problems from them. They decided not to go back at it that way. They essentially buried it in this bill. And they killed Obamacare. And let me just tell you the numbers. When you're talking about 3.4 million Californians who might get thrown off their health care because of this bill, when you talk about $30 billion, that's the amount of federal funding that California might lose. When you talk about almost 800,000 Californians who are food, who basically may lack food in one way or the other. 1 in 4 kids in Alameda County has a problem with hunger. You're talking about a huge impact on California, and this is where Republicans like Valadeo have got to sweat it out now and see, is this the ammunition that's going to take them down? And the health care issue, I think, is the one that has gotten voters' attention. Whether that can, as you said, Tim, a lot of these provisions don't kick in until after the midterms. Whether voters' attention span is that long, we're going to see, but people are going to start feeling the impacts. I talked to one home health care nurse in Michigan this week. She goes to a family with disabled kids. They have a huge poster outside their house, Trump, my president. And she said, I wanted to tell them, you know what, I'm not going to be coming here anymore to help your family because of this bill. That's the kind of impact we might see all across the country on this one.
Josh.
Yeah, I would agree with both Tim and Carla on the fact that actually we're not going to see the biggest impacts of this bill until right around the time of the midterms and after, and really the effects will be, I guess, then 2027. The biggest losers in this bill, poor people, young people who are going to be saddled with increasing debt and interest rates because of the deficit that will continue to grow substantially, which is, something that usually is a Republican talking point that can be capitalized on for elections. Democrats have a much harder time worrying about that or being using it as an advantage for elections. I think when we talk about the impacts on healthcare, it's not necessarily the Republican talking point on this is that we're not actually kicking people off health care. We're just making sure that everyone is doing their best to get employed, and then there's all these provisions. But if anyone here, and I'm sure all of us have, has tried to deal with Kaiser or Cigna or whatever hospital and medical provider you have, it is an impossible labyrinth to get to the person you need to talk to. And most times you just give up in exasperation after an hour or two, sometimes more. Now, then imagine that you have kids, you have a job, you have all sorts of other things in your life. You will eventually just give up, and that is what they're counting on. And so that is really toxic, and it means we are going to be a less educated society because people are not going to want to get saddled with tuition and student loan debt. They're not going to want to jump through the hoops of doing the healthcare, so they're going to get sicker. I think it's actually going to contract, and so we're going to see the people who are older and we're going to see people who are younger both suffering, and the people in the middle who are middle class also won't be getting the largest benefits because of the tax cuts for the rich. So I think it's a abomination of a bill, and at the same time I had every expectation that would pass because all of these Republicans who stood up and acted like they're deficit hawks and they were like, we're not going to vote for this. At the end of the day, and this is Trump's superpower, he knows these people will crumble. They will not really take a hard stand. There are not enough John McCains left in this world, or at least in Congress, to actually have a backbone on this stuff. So I think it's very troubling. I have not a ton of faith that Democrats and Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Democrats, can really pull this all together because I have not seen any kind of cohesive strategy in messaging. And so, yeah, I think the natural pendulum swing is that Democrats will be able to get a majority back in the House. But that's just more cyclical, more than actually earning it. And I think, Democrats are just going to have to, in some ways, rely on Trump to further implode in different ways, and we're going to talk about that, I'm sure.
Right.
Tim, is the healthcare issue, one of the bigger weapons that the Democrats could use out of this, do you think?
Well, it's all, of course, all of it's all about how you spin it.
Right.
So the Republicans would say, well, people who are age 26 to 50, who are able-bodied, well, they should be going to work, and they should be, we should be incentivizing work, and they should be going to work and getting health coverage through their employer. I think that can resonate as an issue. I think most, your broad center of people, if you presented that argument, I think they would agree. But I think as always, and I think the other thing on healthcare, and we learned this in 2017, Republicans really failed then, because it's not like we didn't know what to do to replace Obamacare with. You can't take something away from people. You can reform it, you can create a new system, but you can't just take something away from people because you're going to get the reaction that you got. My boss has literally written books about here's what you do to replace Obamacare with. You could have taken her book and made it a bill text. They didn't have the courage to stand up behind it. And I think in some ways they didn't know what to do, didn't agree amongst themselves. This time, I think the things that they're focusing on as far as that work requirement, the issues of, should undocumented have access to taxpayer-funded health care, I think there is more, they are more popular than you would think. But you're right about David Valadao. That is a tough vote for him. Now, he says he got some promises and provisions where the impact won't be as bad in his district. That's what the campaign's about, right? Can he effectively argue that message of, actually, I did protect you, I did follow through on the things that I said. But a lot of it, I think, is just really policy malpractice. But I guess, as someone who works in policy every day, we always from the sidelines think we could do a better job than those legislators in crafting these bills. And I think all of this is an example of that.
Well, and just one point, I'm not a policy guy. I just focus on politics and weird personalities and controversy. But I would say that Valadao had no other option, because if he doesn't support it, then Trump will primary him. Mm-hmm. And so then he's definitely going to lose. It's like he has absolutely no future. And that's why so many of these people in Congress did end up folding under pressure. It's because they're pretty much guaranteed to be out of a seat in a political career and free dinners and all the other perks of being an elected
Propels
official
courage, right.
if they were to go against Trump on this. So like the math is pretty simple. It's like either try and hang on and maybe you can squeak out another term, or you just were certainly done as a elected official.
And let me just say, the Ag Secretary says that the people on Medicaid can take those jobs in the fields anyway, so what's the problem?
Well, I mean, there are a fair number of folks who are working full-time who do not have health care. So, I mean, they're going to feel it. You know,
Yeah.
a message of, oh, you should go out there and work harder. It's like, I'm working. Maybe we're even working 2 jobs.
Right.
And, you know, they're working poorly paid jobs. They're
Right.
people
Yeah.
who maybe in the past might have gotten a factory job in a union and with all the benefits, et cetera. And now they're working 2 jobs and no health care.
And they're going to have to fill out work requirement, paperwork. It's just not going to happen. The idea, I think, was to kick a lot of these people off.
Now, yeah, now,
To make up for the tax incentives given to wealthier Americans.
well, they need the money.
And fund ICE so that we can deport so many more people.
Well,
ICE,
yes.
ICE is being supersized. There was, did I see this correctly? The no tax on tips was included. What?
It was included, but for 2 years or 3 years, something like that.
And only
It's a
up to
limit-
$25,000.
Yeah, and it's a
only if you
limited-
get paid in cash, right?
Wait, it goes away after a couple of years?
It's a limited amount of time, yeah.
There you go.
That's generous.
2 years,
Yeah.
convenient.
Yes. What happens in 2 years? I forget.
Yeah.
Okay. Good questions. I will get to them, but
Okay.
they're kind of not right along with what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Let's see. How do I get into the next topic? So, the Jeffrey Epstein scandal is something I've generally not wanted to talk about because, frankly, it's gross and tawdry. But a lot has been happening, and it's having political impact, ferment. Who knows how long it'll last or how long it'll create troubles for people. But things are happening. Today, the White House announced the president would not name a special prosecutor for this. This comes right after the Department of Justice, in fact, fired the woman who had prosecuted Jeffrey Epstein.
James Comey's daughter.
Well, I saw the last name. I didn't know that. Okay, it was James Comey's daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, she kind of
Yeah.
was lucky to be
That would have
still
been a
employed
good
this long.
trivia question tonight, by the way.
Oh, shoot, sorry, I ruined it.
Yeah.
Well, since you said that, Josh, you're in the hot seat.
Yeah.
What do you make of the? You talked earlier about not sure if the Democrats are going to be able to handle effectively getting a message out, targeting things on the BBB, but they seem to be making a lot of hay on Epstein right now. Is that just kind of fish shooting in a barrel, or do they have something that maybe?
So a week ago, I would have been like, I don't know if this story's going to have legs. We live in this cycle where everything is moving so fast, and social media, it's like it's a huge story, and then we move on. Like today, we're all talking about the CEO holding his arms around his HR official, and it turns out they're having an affair at a Coldplay concert. We will not be talking about that in about 2 days.
Maybe.
So the Epstein thing, though, is it has more legs than I expected, really, and it's been going on. And what's really interesting about this story, beyond just the really ugly, tawdry kind of aspects that you mentioned, is this was a rallying issue for Republicans throughout election cycles now. And it really radicalized a lot of the people in the MAGA base. And this was, when we talk about certain core issues that people vote on, whether it's pro-life or pro-choice, whether it's about religious freedom or firearms or what have you.
Right.
Epstein was an actual issue that really, rallied people to vote for Trump and the right. And so now, with his decision not to release these files after they even claimed they were on AG Pam Bondi's desk, now the people who have supported Trump are turning on him. There's, the Joe Rogan types, the influencers on podcasts are really turning on him, and they're feeling like he has broken a promise of what he was going to do. And of course, Trump's always for years has been, years before Epstein was arrested and imprisoned, they were friends. They hung out together. They socialized. So it makes some sense in their mind, oh, well, this is why Trump wouldn't want to release it. Well, the Wall Street Journal today put out a bombshell report that basically says that Trump sent him a gift for his birthday, and it said something about keeping our secrets. And it was very, very gross. And now, with all the decisions that Trump's saying, and he's actually gaslighting his own people, saying that Democrats have made them believe this hoax and that they're fools to believe this, and all of this stuff. So he's actually now gaslighting his own base, and Democrats are trying to capitalize on it by saying, yeah, either release it or it was always a hoax. And so it's now just the weirdest world we live in this moment. Epstein is now a strength for Democrats. And so now, because things move so fast, this could, fall over and flip on its head any moment. But it is super fascinating. And all right, so beyond just the political weirdness of it all, Harmeet Dillon, she's a Republican attorney from San Francisco who is now running the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Just in the last month, I wrote a very long profile story for The Standard about who she is as a person and how she developed her value system and how she's now rewriting the script on civil rights in America. Now, the Republican base has said Trump needs to fire the Attorney General Pam Bondi and put Harmeet Dillon in that place. However, Harmeet Dillon has rallied behind her boss, Pam Bondi, and is saying this is stupid, this is all this stuff. So the more that the Trump people circle the wagons and kind of try and become more tight-knit and support each other, the more that more people could go down with the ship. And so it's this really crazy scenario. I do think that it's a winning issue for the time being, but again, who knows how long it lasts.
No, this one is called in the literary world hoisted on his own petard. I mean, you can't be pumping people up. Don Jr., Vance, you name it, Kash Patel, all of them saying we need to see this file. What are they hiding? And then say, well, we're not hiding anything. And now he's turned on his own supporters, calling them stupid for following this. Yeah, weaklings. I mean, it is bizarre. It's like you said, the Harmeet Dillon thing is quite interesting too, because I tend to think she's putting it out there. I really support Pam, but in the background, she's become much more. You'll see the chess pieces change, but I think, yes, are Democrats onto this now? Yeah, and people like Ro Khanna has been one of the lead voices. Put it out there. Let's see the file. Trying to force a Republican vote on it, and Trump keeps trying to get away from it. And I tend to think this visit of Pam Bondi out here to Alcatraz today was just, shiny object.
Yes.
Throw it out there.
Right.
Let's not talk about this anymore. I think they're going to have to address, this is not going to go away. And this Wall Street Journal story, which just broke right before we came, which has a very baudy, address between Trump and Epstein. The fact that he's I don't even know the guy, he's dead now, and obviously he was a really good friend. It's a Democratic hoax. I think CNN did a real piece tonight of all the things he's called a hoax. How many times can you do that? I don't know. Well, as you said, Josh, I mean, stuff changes so quick in politics now. But this one seems to have legs, and I think he has to worry about it because he's got a base made up of a lot of particularly younger men who aren't really into voting that much, but they voted for him. And if they break off and just say, forget this, I'm out, he can lose a significant part of his base.
Far-right influencer Laura Loomer said that the Epstein case could end up consuming the Trump presidency. Tim, overstated, or could this be something mishandled?
Laura Loomer.
Yes, Laura Loomer. We're talking about Laura Loomer tonight,
yes.
I mean, I think it just goes to you live by the conspiracy theory, you die by the conspiracy theory. I mean, and keep in mind, this is something, he didn't dream this up, right? His focus groups are the rallies. And he goes and takes the temperature and throws these ideas out, and he sees what resonates, and that resonated more than anything else. And exactly as Josh said, right? It's the elite are getting away with bad things and bad actions, and we put our faith in Trump to take these people down. And the betrayal is a real thing. Now, the question is, what's the extent of it? Does the average voter paying attention to this, the average 3-time Trump voter looking at this and saying, I don't know now? But I think when you have the noise, and the noise is out there and growing and continuing, that's not a helpful thing. And I agree on what are they thinking with the communication strategy? I mean, just the going out there with, it's sitting on my desk.
Yeah.
Well,
And the binders with
And the
the
binders,
people
they
holding
had
them.
they had this display in, I think, like February, where all these kind of Laura Loomer type people on the internet, they all were going out with their little binders. This is phase 1 of the Epstein files. I do think, speaking of the Wall Street Journal, there's a very interesting article that Alan Dershowitz, who was the attorney for Epstein, put out this week, and I think he was part of the Trump damage control. But he made a point that I think is probably true. And he said, a lot of these cases involve ongoing litigation, and a lot have been sealed by judges. And so that there are certain people that, whether it's a list or not, they probably are not able to release those. Okay, I think that's probably true, but you can always put out things and redact them. Right? Now, of course, we know that will cause new conspiracy theories, but if you were serious about we can put out everything that we can, you would do that. But I totally get it. Can't you see the scene inside the Oval Office when he's saying, I did this, because really, Trump is probably, as of last week, not this week, the peak of his power of his entire time in office, both terms. Passing that bill where he's at on the international stage with some of the things he's doing, you would think everybody, my people should be dancing in the streets, and instead they're not, and the knives are turned on him. Whether he can turn around, I wouldn't underestimate him. Right. There'll be another fun thing, just a distraction or
a UFC fight at the White House, and
that's right.
It's like essentially like the movie Gladiator. It's just.
Are you not entertained?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But Carla's right on the the positioning, because there's also the positioning of Kash Patel, the FBI director, and Dan Bongino, the deputy director. Dan Bongino is threatening to resign.
Can you explain some about what that's about? Because this whole thing where he's not showing up to work, like he's decided he's a work-from-home employee.
Yeah,
definitely problems between him and Bondi.
Yeah, is that?
Things are starting to crack apart there.
And I guess I didn't understand that. The MAGA base had a lot of issues on Pam Bondi, because I always thought from afar, well, I would think people would like her, right? And
she had been with Trump defending him.
And was a 2-term Attorney General of Florida and all the things. But that's right. So Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent. He was a talk show host and influencer and all of that, a very Trump guy, and got this deputy FBI director position, and he was one of the most vocal in his broadcasting career about this. And from what I understand internally, he thought he was doing some things to try and douse the fire, but it ended up making things worse. And he feels like, I'm not going to be the fall guy for this thing. But I think some of that is posturing too.
I wonder, Tim, if the next chapter on this is the whole money aspect of it. And Julie Brown, who's been the lead reporter at the Miami Herald all the way through on this, has said nobody has really, the follow the money issue.
Right.
This guy was a billionaire. Nobody's exactly sure where he got his money from.
Right.
Or who he gave it to. There are members of Congress that have like houses through trusts from him. That
settlement agreements that were sealed, and so those records
that may be where this goes next.
And the Prince Andrew money and all of that too. And I didn't realize today, I was reading today, one of the issues, this was in the Alan Dershowitz column, so Ghislaine Maxwell, her father was Robert Maxwell, the famous, newspaper titan in England, who apparently was a secret Mossad agent, and that was part of the conspiracy theory as well. It's like, boy, that story took a turn, and I don't know where that came from.
This is why you don't want to go down the Epstein rabbit hole too
Yes.
far.
Right.
If you wrote a Netflix series about this,
yeah.
people would be
There
like,
will
"Oh,
be.
you've gone over.
There will be
you've
many.
Jumped the shark there."
I do think the Epstein thing will be a huge issue. There's a way to capitalize on it. I think Tim's point that like our voters, the average voters who aren't on social media all day or watching certain news programs, they're not going to care. It's going to be back to the economic kitchen table issues. But Trump's movement, the MAGA movement, can't afford to lose about 10% of those people. And those are the kind of real fringy folks that could maybe actually go to something like a third party that Elon Musk is pitching out. Now, I have no faith that Elon Musk will stick to this project for consistently enough, and that like they can really galvanize it and run it in a good way. But it's just enough. Like when we talk about percentages, it doesn't take a lot to shift the scales.
And a CNN poll today showed, I think it's 65% of Republicans think the government's hiding something, and something like 89% of the Democrats. But it's definitely strong on both parties. So yes, it's taking its toll on his base and the Republican.
Yeah.
And the key thing with the Trump voter, and we saw this, in the last election in the polling, right, is that there is a good percentage of that's a casual voter. They only came out for him. They weren't engaged in the process. Many weren't even voters before Trump came in. So that's, if you lose those people, that's a real, it's a real kryptonite.
Absolutely.
And it works both ways. Obama gets elected on this wave of enthusiasm, and people who came out and voted either for the first time or at least rarely for them. And then 2 years later, they're like, "Yep, okay, job done.
Yeah, it's over. Right.
You didn't give me a pony." So, okay. Well, let's move on to some other stuff. There's a lot going on with California political leaders, and we want to try to cover a lot of it. So let's start with our hometown U.S. Representative Nancy Pelosi. She's running for re-election. Scott Wiener, state senator from the same area, has announced he's running for her seat in the next election. He may. So he's giving us some wiggle rooms. Is he trying to force her to not run in 2020, or she said she's not going to run in 2020? What's the story?
There's a lot of speculation about Pelosi because remember she broke her hip. A lot of people who know her say she hasn't recovered from that as well as you think. The age issue is an issue with Democrats, although a lot of Democrats would say, look, if all our older Democrats were like Nancy Pelosi, we would have no problem. But the fact is, when you have the kind of movements coming up like you're seeing in New York City with Mondami, I mean, I think you could very well see that out here, and you already have that kind of, I don't know, I don't even know him, Sajid
Shoykat Chakrabarti.
Chakrabarti. Okay, a tech millionaire.
Centimillionaire.
And somebody who was AOC's chief of staff, worked in the Bernie Sanders campaign. This is a guy with credentials who's declared out here, who's already making a stand against Pelosi. That is the kind of voter, when you look at the polls in the New York City race, it's under 45 voters who are really strongly behind him. And you could see that same thing happening here. I wonder. What, Josh, you think?
Yeah, so I've covered this quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so Pelosi has not made a decision yet on whether she's going to run next year.
Yeah, she's filed, but she hasn't actually
She's
decided.
filed, which is kind of a requirement,
Right.
basically, because she has too much money in her campaign account because she raises for so many other people in Congress that she has to legally say that I'm running, but official announcement hasn't come yet. We're going to actually have campaign disclosure forms due at the end of this month. And I think these forms, and Carla's read these a million times too, these forms, when you see how much money is coming in and the way it's being spent, it gives you a real indication if someone's actually running for office. And I think we're going to know pretty clearly there if Nancy's really into this thing. My gut, just me personally, I don't think she's going to run. I think this is going to be her last term. I think the reason Scott Wiener, our state senator for San Francisco, set up a campaign for Congress in 2028 is because he had to. He had an exploratory committee and reached a threshold of almost $1 million. So then he has to declare a campaign. He's subtly saying, I really want this seat, but I would never challenge Nancy, never in a million years. But if she decides not to run, he can just transfer that money from 28 into a 26 campaign account. And so he's very much ready to go. He's more moderate, although he has stances that definitely rile people up, being openly gay man who's very pro-LGBTQ rights, wearing leather at Folsom Street Fair and, doing little provocative photos sometimes. But he's definitely a moderate, pro-housing, YIMBY. Shoyka Chakrabarty is a candidate who has already announced to run against Pelosi next year. And as Carla said, former AOC campaign manager and chief of staff, very progressive, very much like Zohran Mamdani, the candidate for mayor in New York. The key difference, though, is that Zohran Mamdani is a generationally good communicator. He speaks like Obama did. Like, that guy can give a speech like nobody's business. Shoyka's a nice nerd. He's just a nerd. And like he has the right policies in line with what that is, but he's not going to whip up a room. He's not going to be doing social media videos that get tens of millions of views and likes and retweets and et cetera. So like, I think right now, Weiner would still be the front runner if Nancy decides about it. If Nancy does run again, I think she'll have a tough race. I think people they are talking about her kind of losing a bit of a step. It doesn't mean she doesn't have sway. It doesn't mean her record's not impeccable by all standards. It just means that there could be a passing of the torch going on.
Doesn't mean her daughter might.
Thank you.
I haven't heard anything about her daughter getting a campaign together.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you're a Weiner, why not? Right? He also is at the peak of his power and influence in Sacramento right now. That major California Environmental Quality Act reform that was included in the budget to speed up the construction of certain types of housing projects and other projects, they said that could never be done. They did it. And, if you can take that on and win, which is the toughest thing, Jerry Brown called it, what was it, the Lord's work to do that kind of reform. It's the first reform in the law for generations, I think ever, really. And, if you have that kind of smarts and power and sophistication that you can do that, something they said never could be done, that you have labor and environmentalists, all these different interests who are against you, and you can take that on and win, well, what's Nancy Pelosi and the Pelosi machine, right?
I would love that because it would be so violent of a Democrat versus Democrat campaign. The headlines would be amazing. But in order for Scott to do that, he would have to give up his state Senate seat.
Right.
So then he has to win. Otherwise, he's out of office and out of a political career. And he still has more years in office, so he has no rush to do that. And I would say, while Nancy Pelosi might be vulnerable, push comes to shove, for one more year, she's going to lean on every favor
that's right.
that she could get. And I bet that would actually invigorate her in a way that would be like a shot of adrenaline. She would come out and be campaigning her butt off.
I think
fascinating.
I would say, too, on the Pelosi side, if her daughter is indeed going to run, she's going to set up the campaign and the announcement and everything to maximize everything for her. But I did look today on Weiner. He's in his last term in the Senate. He just was he was elected in 2016, so he was just elected to his last term in the Senate. So it's up or out. So he's got 4 years, so he can be there till 28.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to happen in 26.
Yeah.
But I think, at a certain sense, if he's going to win, he has to in some way run through the Pelosi machine, whether it's her or her daughter. And so I think you got to gird up for that fight, regardless. It's going to be pop the popcorn. You're going to have some great stories to write when it happens.
Go for it.
Recently, Governor Gavin Newsom responded to the suggestion that Texas might gerrymander, really, I guess, more gerrymander its districts. He responded by suggesting that California could do this. It has met an interesting response, a wide range, even just within Democratic circles. So, Carla, lay out the table. Tell us what this is all about, and what do you think?
Newsom has been just out there like a machine on podcasts all over the place, talking to right wing, left wing, and his move here to talking about Texas, I think, is a move to pump up Democrats and to just say, we're fighting back. He has taken on the fighter stance. Democrats like him for that. But is this realistic? No. Let's be honest. Newsom has said himself, this is after Texas. The governor of Texas and Donald Trump have said, Trump said to him, find me 5 more districts, essentially, kind of like find me 11,000 votes. And the Texas legislature is going at it. Newsom said, look, if they're not going to play by the rules, if they're going to color outside the lines, then we should do that too here in California. And let's see, maybe we need a special election, or maybe we need a constitutional amendment or something, but we're going to look into it. I think this is all sort of performative myself. Talking to Tony Quinn today, somebody who really knows California politics with the California Target book, he said, wait a minute, nobody remembers this, but the Republicans tried this move in 1983. There was an initiative that was on the ballot, voters approved, for redistricting in between the census. The census, that's what the California Constitution demands, that redistricting right now, but thanks to Prop 20, passed in 2010, it can only take place right after the census and by a citizen commission. Not legislators don't draw the lines. The Republicans tried this in 1983. They had an initiative. They took it to the ballot. Voters approved it. They were 4 months away from this election to redraw the lines that they thought were unfair. And the Supreme Court in California stopped them and said, this is unconstitutional. You cannot do this. And from what I understand, experts say it cannot be appealed to the Supreme Court because it's a state constitutional issue. So it seems like that puts a lock on it right there, that this is just sort of drama. You can talk about it all you want, but if you really want to take it to the legal level, it's completely unconstitutional.
It's so silly, the whole thing, really. I mean, the first, for starters, just the process of doing it, if you think through it. I've been around my youthful appearance notwithstanding, I've been around Sacramento long enough that I've seen politicians draw the line and the commission draw the line. It's a year-long process when they do that, whoever draws the lines. There's so much work you have to do on data analysis and looking at census tract data and all of that to draw these lines that it's an incredibly difficult, very cumbersome task. Very smart people like Tony Quinn back in the day, did this work, and it seems to be the people that do that are the ones we rely on, cycle after cycle to do it. So there's that it just, you can't possibly do that in this compressed amount of time. Then there's the legality of it, right? That we, the voters, approved the independent commission. There's this theory, a legal theory of, the Constitution falls silent on mid-decade redistricting. So, you could either have, apparently the legislature could just draw new lines and submit them to voters for approval, or legislature could put another constitutional amendment on the ballot to change the process and give them the authority to do it, and then do it. Well, the legislature just went on recess today for a month. They're done for the year September 15th. They're not going to be able to agree on any of that, I would argue, in time. And then you got to vote on it. So you would vote on it probably in February or March. Well, that's right when you're filing for the next election. So how would you impact all of that? That, is practical. But then the Pandora's box of this thing. If you're opening up redistricting, this is something you can't control. Gavin Newsom isn't going in with, here's my lines, do it as I want it, let's go. The Democrats in the House, they're going to want to say in how the districts are drawn. Do you think and who is responsible for drawing the lines? State legislators. Do you think they're just going to say, hey, let's draw lines for our friends can win? No, they're going to draw lines to get themselves elected to Congress. Do they care that, like, someone who's been in Congress a long time, like, say, Mark DeSaulnay, right? Well, he's been there long enough. If we drew the lines a little bit here, a little bit there, now Assemblymember so-and-so has a district in Congress. So that would be a total mess. They're not going to be able to agree upon that amongst themselves. Then you have the demographic issues, right? Every 10 years, it's a huge fight between the Black Caucus and the Latino Caucus for representation, primarily in the greater LA area. If you gain a Black seat in Congress, you lose a Latino seat in Congress. Those are ugly internal fights that happen every decade. Then so there's that you're never going to agree on that. Then there's the legal challenges, right? And there's several districts in California that are subject to the Voting Rights Act. Now, we referenced her earlier. Who is the lawyer in charge of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice? Harmeet Dillon. And who would in a heartbeat file lawsuits to stop any plan under the Voting Rights Act? Harmeet Dillon. So however you look at it, this is terrible, but to me it goes from, and just silly, I mean, it's so that we're spending this time and energy, right? Is just, it's a waste of time. And if they spend the last month of the legislative session fighting about this in lieu of other things, but, a lot of the argument for this is made in terms of it's anti-democratic. And yeah, I would argue politicians drawing district lines is kind of the definition of anti-democratic. But in this case, you had independent people draw the lines in California. The diversity you see, especially in the legislature today, and I don't mean by, yes, to a degree, people of different ethnic backgrounds, people of different kind of life experiences that have gotten elected to the legislature, age, all of that. You have that because you have these independent lines that were drawn, that they weren't looking to protect incumbents. Guy like Assemblyman Alex Lee from San Jose would never be in the legislature under the old lines.
And he's against this idea.
And he's against this idea for the very point of, you may not like the choices that voters made, but it was voters that ultimately made the choice.
Right.
And to kind of carry on to why Newsom said this, and I think this is an important point, or why he's talking in Texas or going on right-wing podcasts. Newsom has basically crafted this lane where he says, we're going to fight Republicans on all fronts. Democrats have been too soft. We aren't talking to everyone. We aren't having difficult conversations with everyone. And the one thing that Republicans have known for years that Republicans have forgotten, or the Democrats have forgotten, is that the only thing that really matters at the end of the day is winning, because you can't govern if you don't win. So when he makes a comment like this, and you both broke it down really great, of why it's just silly and actually bad for democracy. And, he's saying this because it's like, okay, if they're going to fight dirty, we'll fight dirty. There is a point where Democrats probably need to realize that you don't want to abandon your values to a certain point. Like there's a line you don't want to cross, and this seems to be one of them. But I think what Newsom's larger point, and if you listen to Trump long enough, you have to kind of sift through and see what his real meaning is. I think that's what his real meaning, Newsom's, is that we just need to do whatever it takes to win. And that's why is he being a governor right now? I have no idea where he is. He's accepting guns from a right-wing podcaster and being like, oh, thanks, brother.
But it was fascinating. I have to say, to listen to him, I don't know if any of you did, 4-hour podcast he did this week with Seth Ryan, who's a big guy on the right. And yes, accepted a gun from him. And
Trump and George W. Bush were getting crap for golfing for 4 hours. What's different than going on a 4-hour podcast?
It was a fascinating conversation, as you said. He was dropping the F-bomb every
yeah.
second.
Oh yeah, that's all part of his shtick.
Very macho kind of. But on the other hand, he is a talented communicator. You've got to give him that. And of the Democrats that are out there, he's going out and to listen to this conversation, he actually he actually communicates the Democratic point of view to a right-wing audience in a very effective way.
If Harris hadn't been on the ticket this past time, I do think his chances would be much higher as being the next Democratic presidential nominee. He'll still be right in the mix, assuming that he does announce, which,
Yeah,
I mean, it's like
yeah,
99%.
right.
But like, I do think like he is kind of like Zoran Mandani, we were saying, and Obama, and, you know, Trump's got his own way of doing things, but like, Gavin Newsom is a uniquely talented communicator. His ability to recall
Yeah.
stats. He is doing this thing now where he's cursing a little bit more to be common man. He's going. Come on, brother. He's doing a southern twang like Bill Clinton. He's doing Obama hand signals.
Like shape-shifting all over.
Whatever that is.
When he was mayor, I love this story. When he was mayor, one of his staffers told me they walked into his office and they found this book of presidential speeches, and it was just chewed up. Every single page had been like underlined notes, dog-eared, like all the yellow Post-its. He would watch YouTube videos of presidential speeches while he was mayor of San Francisco, and that's how he spent some of his days. And so, like, he has been studying for this moment for so long.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And the thing is, too, about him, which is really kind of unique, he is ahead of the curve on a lot of issues. He has been. I remember when I covered him as mayor of San Francisco, sitting down with him in some restaurant here where he went on, and this was, 15 years ago, I don't even remember, and going on about AI and how it was going to take millions of jobs in California. And, do we know how many truckers there are in California? There's 3 million. They're going to lose their... This was before anybody was talking about AI.
I have an AI story on Newsom coming Monday.
Yeah.
Read the standard,
do you?
please.
Okay. But that's the kind
If he was in a different state other than California, I think it would be no doubt he'd be the nominee.
But California's brand, as California's brand is kind of toxic in the rest of the country.
Right.
But they think we're, elite West
That's
Coast.
right.
Well, we are.
Well, yeah, we are, right.
But I'd say, too, on that, I think a very important thing in politics is authenticity. And he does not ooze authenticity when he's on talking about how macho I am and all of this stuff. I mean, this is a man who started his career selling Chardonnay. I mean, that's kind of the opposite of all of that.
With Getty money.
With Getty money, yes.
Hashtag relatable.
But I think that's the thing, when I write about, it's a lot of the themes of my book. And one of the things about Gavin Newsom is that what's most important is kind of creating these vibes and feels and all the imagery, the cute little shirt with the bear logo, picking up trash, all of these sorts of things. And, I think it's much more important to pay attention to what he does rather than what he says. And that's where I think we were talking about this beforehand. When he gets out onto the trail and if he allows himself to be subjected to tough interviews from national press, there's the natural next question is, well, yes, Governor, you talk about that, but what have you done on it? What have you accomplished on it? Yes, you delivered a check. What are the results? And I think that's something that, you can be cool and kind of do all these things, but you're kind of out there on a limb and easily, when you get on a debate stage.
He's been
good luck.
training. He's been training since for the last few years. He did the debate with Ron DeSantis in
That's right.
Florida.
Yeah.
He's been doing his tour of southern states. He went on a trip to China a couple years ago and was basically being a foreign ambassador. He's now doing all these right-wing podcasts. He's building up that kind of callous muscles, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
I don't think he'll have any problem doing national interviews. And I think the hard part for Newsom, you say, is the authenticity. I agree with that because polling shows that he is great first impressions, really good, probably second or third time. See him a little bit longer, he starts to wear on you. You start to notice the affectations. I think, I do think that he is very talented in his own way. I think he'll find ways to pivot and brag about the California economy and what we're doing to prop up the nation and lead an innovation. The one thing that Newsom will have to contend with as well. Losing my train of thought here. It's he's so great.
Well, one of the things I have to say, when it comes to the communication skills, he is one of the few politicians he doesn't read a teleprompter because he can. He's dyslexic. So we've seen him do, financial rundowns of the California budget up in Sacramento, and he goes on for 2.5
Literally
hours
3
and
hours.
has all the numbers in his head. I mean, so when it comes to going on any of the shows, Fox News. By the way, he just sued Fox News for $787 million. Because they
relatable.
said he says they lied about him and his call with President Trump, and he wants an apology. Those kind of things. It's kind of, he is outside the box. And when you're looking at the other the other governors, U.S. governors who are sort of in the mix for 2028. Yeah, he's definitely.
He's right there. It'll
Yeah.
be Shapiro, Pritzker.
Yeah.
There'll be Gretchen Whitmer. I remember my point. Thank
Yeah.
you for being patient with me. He has a book, a memoir that's coming out, and the publication date has been pushed multiple times. It was supposed to come out early in the spring, then it was going to come out this fall, and now it's coming out next year. The title, as far as I know, is called A Young Man in a Hurry.
Whoa.
Dear God.
Yeah. All right, I'm done. You guys are great.
Just think, though, if he's elected,
That was good.
if he's elected, get ready for a 6-hour State of the Union.
Oh, can you imagine?
Along the lines we've talked about both competition within the Democratic Party, generational divides, and all of that kind of stuff. One of our audience members asked, "What are your thoughts about David Hogg and his Leaders We Deserve organization?" I mean, he's created some.
Well, that's where you get the age issue in the Democratic Party, and there was so much talk about that. The Democrats need to have some way to appeal to these younger voters who went to Trump. They need to be able to speak to them, and they don't have enough candidates to do that. David Hogg, that was one of his initiatives. He rubbed a lot of people the wrong way in doing it,
Yeah.
I think. But he was up against the DNC machine, and by the way. What have you heard from the DNC lately that's any
major
value?
mess.
Nothing. as far as
Yeah. So David Hogg, the Parkland shooting survivor, very progressive in his politics. I think there's like 2 layers to it. One, like there's no doubt that Republicans are better at embracing new players to the scene, even if they don't agree. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene, as an example, like not liked by most of her colleagues. However, they're like, she's onto something. She's tapped into this thing that voters want, and not all voters, but like
In her district.
In her district, and Democrats, I would argue, like need to have an ability to say, okay, we're going to stop saying, do you agree with us on these issues, and we're just going to identify talent. It's like there's like a phrase in like professional sports, football. I watch way too much football. And like the idea is that you don't draft for positions, you draft for talent. You take the best player available. And what Democrats need to do is just start getting people who are like Zoran Mondani, even if he's not really going to be the policies that lead the ticket, he's galvanizing people, and you then will have these really hashed out, hard fights, hard conversations. And then if you look to Republicans, you see what they do? They supposedly fight like cats and dogs behind closed doors on this big, ugly bill. And then what happens? They pass it. And that's what Democrats need to kind of learn is like, I'm not saying David Hogg is like someone that I agree with very much, but like, or his style even, because I think like there is like this younger wing in the party that is just so annoying. The Gen Z wing of the party, and I'm sure I was like that when I was in my 20s. And so like, the point is, though, you can't just say, all right, we're boxing you out, you can't come in. You got to find ways to elevate these people, work with them, coach them up. It can't be an all or nothing. And Democrats, unfortunately, if you look at the delegation from the Bay Area over the last 15 years, it has been quite old. And so then what happens is you're not encouraging young people to get involved because they feel like there's no position for them because all these seats are just being held for eternity. So I do think that the David Hogg thing and the Zoran Mondani thing are 2 lessons. It's like you can either embrace Mondani because he's almost certainly going to win, or you can turn on him like you did David Hogg, which only encourages more people to not want to take part in the democratic process. And then you get stuck with Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams, which is like, who wants that? It's just like, we're debasing ourselves
Yeah.
just because we're scared of these policies rather than trying to work with this person's policies.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is, right? It's and the right's gone through this, and the left is now going through this, right? It's generational in terms of this is an old, tired way of doing things, and here are people with a new way of doing things that actually may be something we don't want to embrace, the ideas they're talking about, but the energy we want to tap into, we want that, right? We want that behind the cause. And so, and a lot of these people, to hog a little bit, you see a Charlie Kirk and people on the right, they're also a little bit, look at me, I'm getting all the names for myself. They could, touch into griftery a little bit of I'm sucking up all the money. But when we talk about a Pelosi, right, and what she might face next year, okay, if you're one of these congressmen who's ruled Washington, you haven't had to run an election, maybe ever, maybe your first primary election, do you want to go out and have to fight one of these people? You don't have it in you to do that. So a lot of them now you're seeing they'd rather retire than go through all of this. But it's something, I would argue it's double-edged. So they have to figure out how do you deal with this energy and this movement where we don't actually agree with that. We don't think that's the right direction necessarily for the party. But then by the same token, okay, if we embrace these people, we embrace the energy, we have that more leftward movement, well, how do we go beat a David Valadao? Because on the House campaign trail next year, anything, we'll call him Mayor Mamdani says, is going to be like AOC, everything she says. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? A lot of these things are going to be an albatross around the neck of Democratic candidates. It may be great for money and enthusiasm, but if you're going to win a majority, it's a big tent. It's a growing party. And there's a lot of, especially this new energy and new interest, it's not really about growing a tent. It's more pushing out an old way with a new way.
So
Briefly?
Yeah, I'll briefly say this. So I wrote a story a couple weeks ago about how moderate Democrats in San Francisco were suffering from PTSD because of Zoran Mamdani's win in New York. And I was like, we just kind of had our own progressive experiment here in San Francisco with District Attorney Chesa Boudin and a couple other folks. And the hate I got was intense, and it was coming all from progressives. And they said it was a slam piece. And the story ends with like, hey, if this guy's galvanizing people, Democrats, why would you want to destroy that? And what I noticed is that progressives have felt so beaten down that they're as antagonistic as some of the MAGA people were before Trump got reelected. And so what happens, though, is that Democrats the Chesa Boudin, they were telling me, Chesa Boudin was an experiment. He only lasted 2 years, and he was a recall almost as soon as he took office. And I do think Mamdani's going to actually experience that same thing in New York if he wins, because he'll be getting attacked from the right and the conservatives and the institutional Democrats and the financial sector and those kinds of moderates in that wing. And that is kind of different than Republicans. Democrats will line up with some wings of the Democrats will line up with the conservatives to tear down a progressive candidate in the way that Republicans don't really do that.
They'll eat their own, right.
Okay, well, on that note, that's our program. Thank you, all of you, for joining us here in the room, everyone watching and listening online. Thanks, Josh Kane, Carla Carnation, Tim Anaya. Have a good weekend. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great.